And I'm very excited that we have Sandra Champlain on the line. Thanks so much for being here, Sandra. Are you there?
I'm here. I'm really thrilled to be here. Hi, Ron. Hi,
Oh,
Brian. And Tom in the background.
yeah, there you go. And thanks for waiting patiently through the news. We have to give the
I
news.
I loved your news. It gave me a real flavor for who I'm going to spend some time with, and I fit right in.
Well, you sure do. And this, your book, and I have read it. We Don't Die: A
Oh,
Skeptic's
thank you.
Discovery of Life After Death. It's one of those. I always try to read the books. I read it. I read it quickly. I did not do. I confess I didn't do all the homework. There's homework with, I think, every chapter but one. And this is so much more than a book about life after death. This is about life before death, life after death, and you touch on so many of the things that I have interest in. I've always been very interested in things like remote viewing, past life regression, psychic mediumship, dowsing. You cover all of this stuff and look at it from almost a scientific point of view, or it is a scientific point of view. And your book is full of resources that has really put my reading list together for the next 2 years, I think. So thank you for that. But you draw on other experts, on so many books, movies, television shows, everything. How do you do it?
Oh, well, you bring up the word homework, and that just like triggered this, oh my God, I don't want to homework. I want to be entertained with a book. And somebody coined my book, We Don't Die, as a handbook for being human. And it's not homework to be done for any other reason, just for you to have a better life. And it doesn't have to be something that you do as you read the book. I mean, this, and I think you're the same way. I think I wrote this book for me, but it's something at any point in your life you can pick up. And some of that homework is just like reflective of where you are, where you want to go, and to give you some tools to get there. So, it really, it's a funny thing. When I felt the urge to write this book, and we can get a little bit into, love to tie in the grief and families fighting and tie it into your law show. But when I sat down and said, you know what, it's time for me to put this in a book, geez, I've never written a book. How do you do it? And I imagined someone sitting right in front of me, and I just started telling my story of just everything that's impacted me, impacted my life. And no, there's no way I could put in everything that I learned. But, yeah, if you want to learn a little bit more about remote viewing or dowsing or whatever that may be, here's some great resources. So I love that phrase, a handbook for being human. And so I'm so thrilled that you read it. I thank you for that.
Oh, I really enjoyed it, and I will read it again, actually. So you just mentioned, you mentioned some of the things that really tie into the show, aside from my interests kind of outside of this legal thing. But the family fighting, that you had some interesting points that you made about sibling relationships when the parent dies. And what were those observations?
Yeah, if you don't mind me just giving a little bit of context to the book, just for your listeners.
Okay.
Because and this is just basically what had me actually write it, is I'm somebody who, I don't want to say I'm scientific, but the subtitle, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death, truly means I was someone that, unless I could prove it's real, it's not real. So you can't tell me there's such thing as mediumship, psychic ability. Even though I was Catholic, I am Catholic, the whole life after death thing, I just chalked that up to faith. Nobody had any proof. You can't tell me there's any proof. And I went through an incredible fear of dying back in the late 90s that had me very secretly go on a search. Is there anything out there that can soothe my fears? And so I studied religion. I ended up studying things like mediumship, psychic abilities, dabbled into near-death experiences and reincarnation and induced after-death communication, which is done by doctors. I mean, there's tons of stuff out there. And bottom line, for myself, again, very privately, I rested my own fears. Like, oh, I got nothing to worry about. So I found the goods on that. And then I felt like, yeah, someday maybe I should tell people, because there is so much pain when we lose a loved one, and wouldn't it be great to let people know this and maybe alleviate some of their fears. But I'm as human as anybody. I want people to like me. I don't want to be controversial. I used to be such a big mouth that this stuff is impossible. I didn't want to turn into one of these crazy woo-woo people and lose my friends, and I very conveniently got busy in my life. And it was on the back burner. Someday I'll do something about it. But certainly I'm not smart enough to be an author. I don't even know how you'd write a book, and who would want to listen to me. We all have this self-defeating voice in our head that constantly reminds us that we're not good enough or not lovable or not smart enough, whatever. So needless to say, I got busy in my life, and in 2010, Dad was diagnosed with cancer. He had a tumor that broke apart part of his spine, and Dad was 74 at the time. He was bicycling 20 miles a day. He was peak shape, and over the course of the next 5 months, Dad deteriorated, and he passed away on May 11th. And I had relocated from Massachusetts, which is where I am now, to Florida, to Daytona Beach, to be by his side. The only single child left. I thought, you know what, I can be anywhere. I'm going to be by my dad's side. And unfortunately, what happened was the relationships with my siblings, we were always good, loving siblings. I mean, not ultra close, but, we close enough. All of a sudden, there started to be a lot of tension. There started to be conversations like, why did Sandra really move to Florida? She must have moved to Florida because she wants more of his money when he died.
Mm-hmm.
The iPad had just came out, and my dad was sitting in his hospital room, and, things were really tough, and he had a lot of pain, but he's like, Sandra, can you pick me up one of those? And it's like, well, sure, if that's what you want. Well, all of a sudden, my brother says, you bought that iPad because you knew Dad was going to die, and you wanted it for yourself. Poor Dad only had 3 days to play with the iPad before he passed away. And so this snowball of all of a sudden, me, who I am so generous, like generous to a fault, got labeled as the greedy sister. And so time passed, that Dad actually passed away. Everything before his death, as far as his care, there's so many arguments between the 4 children. Common denominator, Sandra, the greedy one. And then Dad passes away, and then it just continued, and it snowballed, and it even got to be the point where I was supposed to be co-executor with my younger sister, and I chose to step down because I thought there's no way that I can deal with this. Plus, I'm guessing you gentlemen and many of your listeners have dealt the blow that happens internally from grief, the pain we're in. And so I stepped down from that, and I even was not present the day my siblings actually divided up all of this stuff. I said, if you guys want to put a box together for me, fine. But I couldn't be there, and I couldn't, there's this reality that, not only I'd lose my dad, but I lost my siblings too.
Wow. So, well, let's continue more on that after this break. And so we're talking, Sandra, about siblings in relationships, and you had a statistic that you cited in the book that over 45% of sibling relationships end when a parent dies. That's pretty amazing.
Well, yeah, and also just as bad is 80% of husbands and wives get divorced when a child dies. 90% divorce rate if one of the two are diagnosed with a life-threatening illness. And so I had to find out what in the world happens during grief that causes people that once loved each other very much to have these tremendous, tremendous arguments, feuds, and that would separate relationships. And Ron, I found it, and that's why I'm so passionate about getting on shows like yours. And I wrote the book, and I actually got into what happens within a grieving brain that could cause something like this. Can I share it with you and your listeners?
Oh, absolutely. Please.
Our brain chemistry changes when we grieve. Most of us expect that we're going to feel really bad, really sad. We've heard that we feel angry and things like that. So when grief comes, most of us don't understand how bad we're going to feel and how much it hurts. But our grieving brain, when we have some kind of a loss, a grieving brain needs to get used to a new environment without the person that we've lost. And I like to compare going through the grieving process kind of like if someone were going through a withdrawal from a drug or a substance abuse. And maybe a poor comparison, but I think people can understand the compassion when I say it this way. When we love someone and they're no longer there, it's like we're not getting our fix of that person in the chemical makeup of our brain. Of course, we call it love, but it really is that we lose, it's like we lose a substance, that we're not getting our fix. And so we go through this withdrawal process. It's extremely painful. We lose some of the neurotransmitters in our brain. We go through anger, rage, depression, incredible sadness, guilt. There's, all these things normally we can expect, and we hear a lot about this. But also, our brain chemistry changes while our brain is rewiring itself, kind of like I said, somebody's coming off of a substance. It has to rewire itself. It needs to get healthy again. And during that process, our memory is off, like our memory centers of the brain. It's not working properly. Our communication centers, our perception. So, like, if I can put this in a real perspective, if you and I are brother and sister, and we are looking at, we hear this all the time, that if people look at a traffic accident, you can have different people all with a different story, because we're perceiving the information into our brain how we saw it, and then that's how we remember it. So our normal memory stinks, even without grief, because so many people could have a different story. But while we're grieving, our memory's really off. However, we're living in our own skin, in our own head, in our own brain, so we don't think it is. So, for instance, a conversation I had with my older sister about Dad's care, she was so angry that I said X, Y, and Z. And I said, but I never said that. Oh, you did. And I said, well, no, this is really what I said. And I explained what I said, and she says, let me get this right. Well, she kept repeating her story and not mine. And finally, after all this time, she says, okay, I got it. And she repeated the words that I felt, because I knew she was going to report in to my other siblings. Bottom line is she reports back on her original story as opposed to my words. Now, at the time, Ron, I thought she was out to get me. However, learning after the fact, a grieving brain really, like, she really thought that this information I said was the truth. And I can't tell you that I probably was just, I probably wasn't communicating clearly. Who even knows if I was saying the same story over and over? And why this is important is because all of these feuds that happen and the problems over some of these fighting and things, I think people aren't communicating because they're not seeing the real truth. And so to have compassion and know that if you're suffering a loss, your brain is out of whack. Sorry to say it that way, but to have some compassion. I had one of my readers knew her dad was soon to pass. He also had cancer, and she made each one of her 5 siblings read the chapter on grief ahead of time, because she knew there were sibling rivalries since they were little kids, and she couldn't even imagine what would happen when they were adults. Well, Dad did pass, and instead of fighting, they each felt the urge to fight, but they're like, oh, that's right, it says right here in the book, I'm going to feel this, this, and this. I do. Okay, let's work on this together. And so they went through dispersing all of Dad's belongings without fighting, having compassion, and staying whole. And can you imagine the opposite, having 6 kids write each other off, and then, that wouldn't be any parent's wish.
Oh, wow.
So
we have a question for you here. We have a caller on the line. Richard, we have just about a minute or minute and a half before the break. You have a question for Sandra?
Yeah, hi, Sandra. This is Richard.
Hi, Richard.
What's your question?
I've been lucky enough to have an autographed copy of We Don't Die. And my question to Sandra is, what is the best way to deal with a suicide instead of a regular kind of death, and how the afterlife may be different?
Can you ask that one more time?
Yeah, what is the best way to deal with a suicide instead of a regular kind of death, and how the afterlife may be different for them?
Oh, a great question. Okay, so suicide. Well, first let me just say to everybody, I am not telling you I'm the expert of all things. I've just collected a lot of information, and I've done a lot of research. And there, like I said at the beginning of the show, we all have this negative voice in our head that's on autopilot most of the time. I can only have compassion for someone who has committed suicide, that they felt life was so bad that that was their only option. Often when we lose somebody to suicide, there's a lot of anger and blame, and they should have done this, or why didn't they tell me, or, whatever. To have compassion that you weren't in that person's shoes, you can't possibly know the depths of their misery, that they would feel that that was their only option. As for the afterlife, as I do believe we don't die, I do believe our loved ones are with us. When we pass, I believe that our life here is an education for our soul. When we die, when our body disappears, it's not over with. But there's no basis of any punishment or anything like that for people that commit suicide. Rather, it is being welcomed into heaven or the hereafter with open, loving arms from those who have gone before us. There is this life review of how your feelings impacted or your actions impacted other people in your life. And so you really look at your life from someone else's perspective, and you probably will feel the pain that you've caused people. That's why if you can get help while you're here on planet Earth, that's the answer, because we still are responsible for our actions and our learning when we pass over. But there's still growth to be done in the hereafter. Again, no blame on someone who has committed suicide, and if someone is considering it, I do believe that we are responsible for our actions, and that it's not like we can escape ourselves. And so life is the place to learn, to play full out, to get the soul growth, so that there's even bigger and better things when we cross over here on planet Earth. That's the answer, because we still are responsible for our actions and our learning when we pass over. But there's still growth to be done in the hereafter. Again, no blame on someone who has committed suicide, and if someone is considering it, I do believe that we are responsible for our actions, and that it's not like we can escape ourselves. And so life is the place to learn, to play full out, to get the soul growth, so that there's even bigger and better things when we cross over.
And since we don't die, then suicide's not going to help, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Let's go to it. Can you stay on for one more segment, Sandra? Is that okay?
Sure. If you'll have me, I would love that.
Great. Thank you so much. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Okay, we're here with Sandra Champlain. Sorry, and Sandra has a website, wedon'tdie.com. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And something else that I noticed that you have is you have a grief service, or We Care Grief Support. Can tell us what that is?
I created a private membership site with a friend of mine who I think she actually has the largest grief following on Facebook with over 55,000 members. We wanted to create a site, which is wecaregriefsupport.com, for people that need a little assistance moving through the grieving process, there certainly are plenty of good books, and even my audio on grief at survivegrief.com, that's free, that helps. But to be in a group, even if it's an interactive site online, makes a difference. It's kind of the difference between hiring a personal trainer and trusting your own exercise abilities to yourself. If you want to have some results, if you want to move through the grieving process, I don't necessarily want to use a little faster, but I think many of us know people that are so stuck in grief that they haven't moved on with their own life because they're grieving so hard. And we want to provide the tools for people to understand grief, understand the automatic thoughts that will come to our mind, like guilt. You know, the more we think guilty thoughts, I should have called that person, I shouldn't have done this, the more we think them, the more we will think them. So to give people the tools as to what the whole world of grief is and give them some mega support moving through it, through a different grief release program, through there must be 20 different ways to ease the pain of grief. I give my book within it. There's a new DVD, a documentary that's been created about me and why I created the book. I had a Emmy Award-winning filmmaker read my book he said it changed his life. He had never believed in anything, and he said he was just curious what the heck I'd be talking about within there. Mm-hmm. And he created this video. It's 50 minutes, him interviewing me on those things that really impacted his life. And so not everybody will sit down like you, Ron, and read a 283-page book, but if they can watch something in 50 minutes, that'll make a difference. So within this WeCareGriefSupport.com community, my book, my audios, just you name it, the DVD, everything I can think of giving is in there. And people can join for a month or they can join for a year. It's very inexpensive. A full 100% money-back guarantee. We're not out to con anyone. We want people to have value. But I also do know sometimes it takes getting a little skin in the game, and by paying a few bucks, we end up maybe taking some of the advice, doing the homework, mm-hmm. and then in turn having some of the results. And my big thing is to get people back in the driver's seat of their life, not being a victim to grief, not being a victim to the little voice inside their head that tells them to talk about football on Facebook as opposed to listening to this great show, and really give people tools to live a powerful life while we're here on the planet.
Mm. And you point out in your book, too, that grief is not just over the death of a loved one necessarily.
No.
Many life circumstances.
Sure. We lose our financial status. We have a business and it fails. Our health changes. Our cat dies. Our, go through a breakup. You move. You have a kid that moves out of the house after living there 18 years. Anytime the apple cart is kind of upset, it can really throw us into this chemical imbalance in our brain because our life is not the way we've been used to it. And so, many of us self-medicate, whether it's food or alcohol or smoking or, whatever that may be, getting real busy on the internet and not paying attention to real life. And, I am so passionate about like I keep saying, getting people in the driver's seat of their life. All those examples that you brought up at the beginning of the show, all those crazy behaviors people did, mm-hmm. People do. As human beings, we're so on autopilot, and we don't even realize that by shifting our integrity, being responsible, starting to take new behaviors or doing new behaviors, new actions, we can have these awesome new results in our life. And often that means stepping into something we're afraid of. But wow, look at the difference. Look at the difference you're making with your show. You might have had your doubts at the beginning, but wow, you're impacting lives of people that you may never meet. So
I hope so, and I hope that people aren't choosing football over my show. That's a big concern. But we're coming to the end.
Okay.
The book is We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. And can you, Sandra, please give the contact information where people can find you, in addition to our website now and our Facebook. You can link up to Sandra. But how do they get the book, get in touch with you? We
You're
care.
so wonderful for sharing it. My website is wedon'tdie.com. And people can get autographed copies of the book there if it makes a great holiday present. But also at your favorite bookstore or Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Nook, Kindle. You can also pick up the books there. And through my wedon'tdie.com site, there's a Contact Sandra button. I mean, I answer every email.
Okay,
so
well, very good. And
be in
people
touch.
can find that. I hate to cut you off, but we're
That's
getting to
okay.
the end. Thank you so much for
You're
joining us
welcome.
today, Sandra. Sandra Champlain.